welcome back to QTV9. So last video we covered how to change the display of a report by adding in the additional objects that we queried. And in this video we're going to go back into the query panel and modify some query filters. So again, to get to the query panel, under the Data Access ribbon, under the Data Providers section, I'm going to select the Edit button. And once we're in the query panel, we got to do a little bit of prep work. I think it'll be easier to grasp this concept if we work with a clean slate. So what I'm going to do is remove all of the current filters in the report. If I look here in the upper right hand corner of the Query Filter section, then you should see a small little symbol that has two yellow filters and a red X on it. This is a shortcut icon that allows us to remove all of the current filters in a query. So if we click that icon, we should get a notification message asking us to confirm our decision. Go ahead and select Yes. And so a quick refresher, remember that anything in the universe outline on the left-hand side can be included as either a result object or as a query filter. Alright, so let's go ahead and expand the entry folder. And we're going to drag in the mode of transportation object into our query filters. So just like our result objects, all you have to do is click the object and then drag it and then release it into the query filter section. So the first thing we'll look at next to the object's name, you should see a little drop-down menu that has the word InList on it. This is what's known as an operator, and these are very important because what they do is define how the query filter is going to take the values that you input for it and filter the data for you. So the default operator is InList, which is very useful. It allows you to put in multiple values into a single filter to constrain the data. But in the event that we wanted to use a different operator, if we click the drop-down arrow right here, you'll see a list of all of the available operators to choose from. And of course, each one of these operators, based on their context, has a specific purpose. So for the sake of example, let's go ahead and change the operator from InList to equal to. So the distinction here is that while InList allows us to input multiple values, for example, in our previous videos we added multiple port codes into the filters, equal to, as implied by the name, only allows a single value. Alright, so the next logical question then is, how do we input that value? So just to the right of the operator, you should see a box that has the phrase type a constant in it currently. And if we click that, we can actually define in the query itself what we want the value to be for that filter. So the constant field is case sensitive, so there's a pretty good chance we're not going to know the exact value to put in here. If we go to the right here, you'll see a button for define filter type. And if we click this, you'll see a few options, and we'll start with the second one, values from list. You'll see what pops up here is hopefully a very familiar prompt dialog box. So I haven't mentioned this in prior videos, but it's a good trick. If you select the column header, then it's going to alphabetize the prompt options for you. And so I want to scroll down here and select a value to input, and pay attention to what happens when I try to add more than one value. So you'll notice that whenever I select a new value, it replaces the value that came before it. Remember, our filter operator is equal to, which only allows one value to be selected. And once you're done, go ahead and hit OK. And you should see that value populate in the constant box. Alright, so we're off to a great start, but our query right now is still very broad. And that's because while we've narrowed it down to a single mode of transportation, we're still asking it to look for every single entry for that mode of transportation that's ever been filed. It's always a good idea to include a date filter object, so let's go ahead and add one of those. Alright, so I'm going to drag in entry date for my second filter. And while I'm dragging it over, you'll notice a small red line underneath the mode of transportation. And what this is indicating is that when I release the entry date, it's going to nest these two filters. Alright, so you should see a little bar joining the two filters together with the word AND next to it. Let's go ahead and put a pin in that for now and we'll come right back to it, but first I want to change the operator of entry date. So a simple one that we can use is greater than or equal to, and for date objects specifically, you should see in the constant box a calendar icon. And this will take us to the calendar menu for us to choose a date. Okay, so now that we have our entry date filter defined, let's go back to this AND. So that AND is also called an operator, but it's working between the two filters themselves. So what it's actually stating is that the mode of transportation must equal vessel containerized and the entry date must be greater than or equal to 5/1/2016. So if you double click the AND operator, you'll see that it changes to the word OR, which means that either of those conditions can be true to give a row of data back. But that isn't what we want for this query, so let's go ahead and switch it back to AND. Alright, so now we're actually ready to run the query. So go into the top right hand corner and select the Run Query button. And one thing that you're going to notice is that when you hit the Run Query button, you're not going to be given that prompt dialog box. It's actually going to go straight to the report results. Now the reason for this is because the filters that we defined are actually hard-coded into the query itself. So if we did want to have the system prompt the user to input those values for those filters whenever the query was run, then we're going to have to define those filters as prompts in the query panel. So let's head back into the query panel really quickly to demonstrate. So remember, on the right side of each query is the Define Filter Type button. If we select that, then you'll see of our available options, the third one down is going to be an option for prompts. So let's go ahead and select that. As a result, you should see that an additional button appears to the left of the Define Filter Type button, and this is the Prompt Properties button. Let's go ahead and pick that. So we're not going to go through all of these options, but there's one important one that I wanted to call your attention to. In the bottom right hand corner, optional prompt. So without this option chosen, the person is required to put in a value in order for them to actually be able to run the query. So let's go ahead and change entry date to a prompt as well. But we're going to skip the next step of going into the prompt properties button and setting it as an optional prompt. So let's go ahead and hit run query. And you should see now that you're going to be prompted to input the values for those filters prior to running the query. If I could also call your attention to the left side of each one of the prompts, you'll see that the first one has a green check mark next to it, whereas the second one has a red arrow pointing towards it. Remember, we did not define the entry date object as an optional prompt, which means that we must enter a value in order for us to be able to run the query. So if I go here though and I select a value for the entry date, you'll see that the red arrow turns into a green check. And now the application is going to allow me to select OK and run the query. And that's going to do it for the 9th video in our series. In QTV10, we're going to combine all the concepts that we've learned so far together and learn how to create an ad hoc report from scratch.